Welcome to this week's episode. Our chances of remaining on the air for the duration of this episode are somewhat dubious given what we're hearing from our internet company today. But I'm Paula Williams.
I'm John Williams.
And we are ABCI, and ABCI's mission is
to help everybody in the aerospace industry sell more of their products and services.
Absolutely. So today we're talking about Hook Point by Brendan Kane. Brendan Kane is also famous for the 1 million followers in 30 days book, which I hated. This one is not so bad. So I did not have high hopes for this one, but it is easier to show than to tell what a hook point is, at least according to the definition of the book. And actually, it is an excellent, amazing, fabulous, powerful concept. And he's got some excellent, amazing, fabulous, and powerful examples in the book. Read just a little tiny bit here. From the very beginning, there are so many people, and this is actually a quote from Gary Vaynerchuk, who is also one of our favorite people. There are so many people who are wasting money in marketing every single day because they're chasing what used to work. But the reality is, the tactic that used to work yesterday will put you out of business today. And that's why a hook point is so important. And this is something that we get a lot of resistance from our aviation marketing people, because we work with a lot of engineers and very technical people and people who want to tell everybody everything all at once, right?
Yep.
Okay, so a hook point can be text. It can be a phrase, a title, a piece of copy. It can be an insight, a statistic, a philosophy, a person's thought, an image or a video. It can be a personality or a performance. It can actually be a beat drop from a piece of music that is instantly recognizable, like the Star Wars theme is a hook point. A cadence, a product or a service, or a combination of all of these things. But what it is it is a distillation of an idea into its simplest form, right?
In other words, KISS.
Yeah.
Keep it simple, sweetheart.
Keep it simple, sweetheart. That's the nice way of putting it, right? So there's a lot of this that is really, really helpful. And I'm going to share an example from the book. And that is, okay. So also hook points can be used for better or for worse. So in the example of using it for better, I don't know if you know this story. Do you know how toothpaste came to be in modern usage or common usage in the United States? In the 1920s, there was a gentleman called Claude Hopkins, one of the pioneers of advertising and modern day marketing. One of the most famous stories about Hopkins is working for Pepsodent toothpaste, right?
Yep.
So in the 1920s, Pepsodent approached Hopkins, and he started writing about how you could improve your appearance without spending a lot of money. And this was a big deal in the 1920s because nobody had any money, right? But you could afford toothpaste. So you may not be able to afford to get your hair done. You may not be able to afford nice clothes, all of those things, but you could afford toothpaste. And prior to this, and this sounds absolutely disgusting, but prior to this, people didn't brush their teeth. Or if they did, they used baking soda or something else. But they didn't sell toothbrushes and they didn't sell toothpaste in the United States. It was just not a thing. And then in the 1920s, they started featuring pinup girls and men in the service. They were the celebrities at the time on billboards and other advertising. And, by the time they said by 1957, the jingle was everywhere. You wonder where the yellow went when you brush with Pepsodent.
Mm-hmm. I remember
And,
that.
this is absolutely true. And, we know from Mickey's experience in the Peace Corps in Morocco there are a lot of people that still don't brush their teeth, in the world. It's just not a thing unless they are marketed to or were marketed to. So the Peace Corps now is doing the marketing that Claude Hopkins did in the United States in the 1920s. So that's an example of a hook point, just making it super simple. You can look better without spending a lot of money. That was the hook point, right? Okay. And here's a bad example.
No, it's an example of a bad way to do it.
An example of a way to do it for evil. Any power can be used for good or evil.
Hi, how are you guys?
Happy to see you.
Thank you so much. It's actually 2 a.m. in the morning,
Oh my
and
goodness.
I was asleep, but I just got a notification, and I just wanted to attend a book club because I wanted to learn. So I thought I should not miss it.
Great. Well, I'm glad you're here, and we are having some technical issues from our end, so I'm hoping that this will work well, and things. But anyway, so this is an example of a bad hook point, and we're of course reading Brendan Kane's book this month.
Yes, hook point.
Right. So George Washington Hill, the president of the American Tobacco Company, asked Bernays how they could get more women to smoke. Bernays contacted psychoanalyst Abraham Brill, who disclosed that to a feminist, a cigarette could symbolize nonconformity and freedom from male oppression. So Bernays decided to get media attention in the natural way that wouldn't look like advertising, which was something that was revolutionary at the time. He chose to do it at the biggest social event of the season, the New York City Easter Day Parade of 1929. And they hired society people who would have floats there, a group of debutantes who would be the equivalent of the Paris Hiltons and Kim Kardashians of the day. Bernays contacted the press the day before the parade and told them that a group of women's rights marchers would be lighting torches of freedom at the parade. He gave the debutantes and other women packs of Lucky Strike cigarettes, and they were instructed not to light them until after they had crossed the street, where he had photographers eagerly waiting to take pictures. So April 1, 1929, the New York Times reported on the event and wrote, "Group of girls puff at cigarettes as a gesture of freedom." And that was the headline in the New York Times that day. So, so much power used for such a terrible purpose. And so, it can be used for better, for worse, but in either case, it was super effective. And so what this book is about is kind of about how to construct and test a hook point, right?
Mm-hmm.
One other example is that there is a group of doctors that call themselves ear, nose, and throat doctor, the technical or the English term. And it's very, very difficult to pronounce and a very complicated concept of how the ears, the nose, the throat, everything is connected and how it all works together to keep you healthy. And so there is one doctor, Michael Bruce, who is known as the sleep doctor. And that's his hook point. So he takes all of that stuff, ears, nose, throat, snoring, gastrointestinal problems, heartburn, all of the things that keep people up at night, and just simplified it to one term, the sleep doctor, right? And it is so much more effective. But the interesting thing about him is that once he started calling himself the sleep doctor, every other doctor on the planet hated it, right? So he developed strong positive recognition from his customers, but the backlash came from people in the field. His colleagues thought he was implying that he was the best sleep doctor in the field, or the only one who did this type of work. So there was a lot of jealousy. He was pushed out of many professional circles. He wasn't invited to conferences in his area of expertise. It took somewhere between about 5 and 10 years for people to stop calling him a charlatan or a sellout, even though he was practicing the same type of medicine that these other doctors were practicing. The only difference is he was calling himself the sleep doctor, and the others felt like that was either inaccurate or inappropriate or bragging or something like that. So, when you're creating a hook point, you're going to have your customers probably react strongly in a positive way, but you may have your colleagues react strongly in a negative way. And I think that happens a lot, or at least that's what people fear among the aviation industry, because, you get these people who are literally rocket scientists, and they don't call themselves rocket scientists. They call them something that has 14 syllables in it. Their specialty is something much more specific than rocket science. But, the way that they explain things is just so complicated that the average person is not going to spend the energy to understand what it is that they do.
I do have an example.
Okay. Of course you do. Everybody does.
Our contractor.
Mm-hmm.
His company name is Honeydew Pro.
Mm-hmm. That's on his T-shirts. That's on everything that he does. And it's a Honeydew Pro.
Yep.
The professional who does all the honeydews around the house.
Right. So people call him up and say, "Can you?" And he says, "Of course."
Mm-hmm.
And it just takes time and money.
Yeah, exactly.
And his schedule is filled from the time he did that to current.
Yeah. Which is absolutely true. Now we're having a hard time getting him back because he's got so much work that he has a hard time doing hours. How about you, Adeela? Did you have any examples or anything that comes to mind?
Right now, no example is coming to mind, but one thing I would like to say that you see that the doctor example that you quoted, although he was a doctor, but he combined the sales techniques to market himself. So this shows us that even if we are like in aviation and we are in technical field, but unless or until we combine the sales techniques in it, we will not be able to sell ourselves. So this is the major thing that many aviation professionals need to understand as well, that although they are very powerful, they are very like skillful in their field, but they need personal branding, they need to sell out themselves. So that is one thing we can learn from the doctor's example.
That's absolutely true. I love that example because, if it were me, I would think I don't need an ear, nose, and throat doctor, but I can't sleep, but I do need a sleep doctor if I can't sleep. So it puts yourself in the shoes of your customer and says, what do you need? I don't need an ear, nose, and throat doctor. I need sleep.
And
So
it also like his popularity also spread because of word of mouth, and the word sleep became associated with it. So it is the very good way that he chooses for his marketing.
Absolutely. And this reminds me of a story of a conversation that I have at least once a week with our customers. The more famous example is Steve Jobs and Johnny Ive. Johnny Ive was Steve Jobs's advertising guy. Steve Jobs, of course, famous for Apple, which simplifies products. They didn't invent the MP3 player. They didn't invent the cell phone. They did not invent the tablet. They didn't invent the personal computer. But you would think that they did because they made these things so popular. And so this conversation was early in Apple's beginnings. They didn't have a lot of money. And Steve Jobs was making a big investment in a full-page newspaper ad. And he's like, well, we're spending a lot of money on this, so I really need to get my money's worth. So let's put this in and this in and this in and this in and make sure that we make all these points and explain all this stuff. And Johnny Ive took 5 sheets of paper and curled them up into balls, right? So he had 5 of these sheets of paper and he threw one of them at Steve Jobs, right? And he said, catch that. And of course, Steve Jobs caught it. And then he took 5 balls of paper and said, okay, that's great. But now catch these. And he threw the 5 balls, right? And Steve Jobs was batting them around the room and didn't catch any of them. And he said, that is why this advertisement needs to make one point, and it needs to make it very simply because people can only catch one thing at a time. And that really summarizes to me, and that example wasn't even in the book, but that's the example to me that comes to mind about a hook point and why it is so important. People are so busy, even if they're flipping through a newspaper, they're not going to read the whole sheet unless there is a hook point that grabs their attention and pulls them in. And, people say, well, everybody has such a short attention span these days. That is not true.
Well, what you have to do is you have to keep the headlines simple.
Mm-hmm.
And if you keep the headlines, that's why people spend 45 minutes in trying to determine a headline and 15 minutes on the document.
On writing the document, the headline is everything.
Yes.
And the hook is everything. So in a video, it's the first 3 seconds. In a text or a post or an article or anything like that, it's the headline. In an email, it's the subject line, all of those things. But I mean, people do not have a short attention span these days. I mean, we just spent 2 hours watching Yellowstone last night. And we have spent hours watching Yellowstone. And it's because that hook at the beginning of each episode and at the end of each episode hooks you into the next one. The first 5 seconds or the last 5 seconds makes you go, I have to find out what happens next. And 5 seconds is actually kind of a long time. That's you have time to read an entire sentence. But if you can bring it down to 2 words like free solo or, save money or the sleep doctor or something like that, that just makes it 1,000 times more effective. So anyway, that was kind of my thought about hook point. Go ahead.
I was reading, I had this book, my brother bought it, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, you must have heard of it. So I always thought that this is going to be a very boring book, and I never read it. And then one day I just opened it, and it was a long time ago, but I opened it and I know this, like the first lines was, it was such a storytelling in it, and the hook was so good that I realized that okay, he is telling about financial, like how to manage finance is such a boring topic, but he tells it in a story, and the hook was so good that I at least read 2 to 3 chapters that day. I remember. So hook matters a lot, and also you carry the story and everything.
Right. Yeah, that's Robert Kiyosaki, right? Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
I don't remember the writer. It was such a long time ago.
Right. No, that's a great book. And he even has a board game that teaches personal finance that we used to play with our kids when they were younger, because it's like Monopoly, except it's a little bit more realistic. It has
current.
Buy a TV and then you're making payments for years, and things like that. And it's really good lesson. I'm sorry?
They use current events.
Yeah, they use more current events than Monopoly, which is kind of silly. No, that's a good example. Rat Race is another great example of a hook point. It's something everybody knows what that is, and they feel it. You talk about the rat race and they go, oh yeah, that is something that really causes me a lot of stress because I'm trying to get off the hamster wheel. I'm trying to get ahead so that my finances aren't controlling me, so that I'm controlling my finances. Very much information in one phrase or 2 words, really. So that's a great example. Just to wrap up really quickly, I had very low expectations of the book. I thought it was going to be like Brendan Kane's last book, which was get 1 million followers in 30 days, which I thought was really spammy and useless because it doesn't matter if you get 1 million followers in 30 days if they are not the right people. So I thought he was putting quantity over quality. And so I thought this book was going to be the same. Not true. This actually was very much worth reading and really good information. So I'll give it a 8 out of 10. Cool.
Good for you.
And next month, Content Inc. by Joe Polizzi. We've read his books before. I'm expecting that this one will be good. I haven't started it yet.